London, 1812. The winter dusk had draped itself over Kensington Gardens like a morning veil, its lavender haze drifting through bare branches, softening the laughter and whispered cruelties of the nobles gathered for the first frost fete of the season. Lanterns, suspended from wrought iron arches, swayed in the icy wind, their wavering glow catching upon Lady Christena Harbury's pale features as she paused near the marble swan fountain, trying, unsuccessfully, to ignore the sting of gossip drifting toward her. "Nearly 30, is she not?" a duchess murmured behind her fan, feigning discretion. "Quite the tragedy. Beauty without a binding promise is like snow on a branch, lovely for a moment, then gone by dawn." Another tittered. "And so exacting. I dare say she frightened her suitors away with all that wit. Men prefer charm, not intellect." Christina's fingers tightened imperceptibly upon the silk gloves she wore, her breath steady yet shallow. She told herself she had long grown immune to society's appraisal of her worth, but words, especially whispered ones, slipped through even the strongest armor. She turned her face slightly, allowing a falling snowflake to cool the heat rising at her cheekbones. If she wept here, the Tun would surely devour her before supper. A cluster of guests parted suddenly, allowing a viscount and his new fiancée to pass. Christina's heart gave a small muted throb when she recognized him, the man who once spoke with her beneath these very trees about shared ideals, shared music, shared futures. Now he looked at her with the polite indifference reserved for distant acquaintances. His young bride clung to his arm, cheeks aglow. They did not slow. They did not remember. Christina lifted her chin, but the ache was unmistakable. She felt as though the entire garden pulsated with reminders. The wrong age, the wrong moment, the wrong fate. Snow accumulated on her shoulders, dusting her like fragile sugar. She forced herself to remain upright, poised, dignified, yet inside, she crumpled like damp parchment. "Lady Harbury." The deep, resonant voice broke through the frosted silence. Christina turned and found herself staring into the solemn, arresting gaze of the Duke of Wintreshire. He stood tall beneath the arching lamplight, dark hair touched faintly with frost, a figure carved from winter itself. His presence dislodged conversations as easily as a gust of wind might disturb a candle flame. Murmurs softened, glances sharpened, curiosity bloomed. He rarely attended garden fetes. "My lord," she managed, sweeping a curtsy that was steadier than she felt. "You honor this evening." "I did not come for the evening," he said quietly. "I came for you." Her pulse fluttered like a trapped moth. The Duke was admired for his impeccability and feared for his distance. Ever since the tragic death of his Duchess 3 winters ago, he had locked himself inside the silent corridors of Wintreshire Manor, leaving society to invent stories about his solitude and the growing gulf between him and his daughter, Genevieve. He was the last man expected to seek conversation. "Walk with me," he said, offering his arm not with gallantry but urgency, as though time itself chased him. Christina hesitated only a breath before placing her hand lightly upon his sleeve. The warmth beneath his coat surprised her. They moved beneath the colonnade where snowflakes drifted like pearls shaken loose from a broken necklace. Distant music trembled through the garden, soft as memory. "My lord," she said at last, "I fear something weighs upon you." "It does," he answered, his voice low, almost raw. "And there is no one else to whom I may speak it." The candor unsettled her. This was a man known for impenetrable restraint, yet he spoke with the gravity of confession. They paused near a lantern whose weak flame fought the wind. The Duke's breath clouded between them. "The Crown has summoned me to present myself, and my family, at the annual Christmas ball," he said. "A decree, they say, to restore the image of unity after the unrest in the northern provinces. I am to stand with my daughter before the monarchy, smiling as though all is well within my house." Christina watched him carefully. "And it is not?" His jaw tightened. "Genevieve barely speaks to me. She dwells in Wintreshire, yet keeps her distance as though I were a stranger. She fears the Tun. She fears their judgment of her mother's death. She will not stand at my side unless she believes she has a protector beyond myself." A cold ripple went through Christina, though she could not name its origin. What protector could ease her fear? "You," he said simply. The word seemed to echo across the stones. Christina's breath faltered. "I beg your pardon. I need you to stay at Wintreshire until 12th night," he continued steadily, "to pose not merely as a companion, nor as a passing guest, but as the woman who guides Genevieve's confidence, as her mother in appearance, if not in truth." Christina stared at him, stunned. Snow melted on her lashes. "You ask me to live in your home," she whispered, "and pretend to fill the most sacred role your daughter has ever known?" He did not flinch. "It is the only way I may shield her from the cruelty of court gossip. They will not dare whisper if they believe she is cherished by a woman of your grace." "My grace," she echoed softly. Grace she could muster. Deception, living beside him day after day, was another matter. "My lord." "Surely another lady." "There is no other lady I would trust," he interrupted. "Your character is quiet but resolute. Your presence softens rooms. Genevieve would trust you before any other." Christina looked away, the pain of earlier gossip returning with fresh edges. To be overlooked as a woman, yet suddenly sought as a mother to another's daughter, it was both an honor and a blow. "You need not remain after 12th night," he added, misunderstanding her silence. "Only until the ball concludes and their scrutiny lessens." "And what will society say of me living under your roof?" she asked, her voice nearly a breath. "A single woman, a duke, a grieving daughter. They shall spin 1,000 tales." "They already spin them," he replied. "At least let them spin something that protects my child instead of harming her." The sincerity in his eyes, dignified, aching, struck her. It was not romance. It was desperation wrapped in nobility. She felt her own heart twisting, aware of the loneliness carved into him, aware too of her own yearning to be useful, needed, valued. "I would not ask this if I had another choice," he said. "But Wintreshire is cold, Lady Harbury. It has been cold for years. Genevieve requires warmth I cannot give alone." The snow fell harder, blurring the lanterns into halos. Finally, Christina inhaled. "If I agree, it will change everything." "Yes," he said. "For all of us." Silence pressed between them. Christina closed her eyes briefly, hearing echoes of the cruel words from moments before. Too old, too discerning, too unwanted. Perhaps stepping into another's grief might save her from drowning in her own. When she opened her eyes, they glimmered with resolve. "Very well," she whispered. "I shall come to Wintreshire." The Duke exhaled, a sound almost like relief, or gratitude he dared not voice. But before Christina could steady her racing thoughts, he stepped closer, his tone dropping to a private murmur that ignited something warm and terrifying within her. "My house has known only silence for too long," he said. "I believe only you could warm it again." Christina's breath caught, not from the cold, but from the unmistakable shift in the air between them, a shift that promised not ease, but upheaval. And as the lantern flickered, casting gold upon his solemn face, Christina realized too late the depth of what she had accepted. The journey to Wintreshire began at dawn, when London still slept beneath a blanket of pale winter fog. Christina sat within the Duke's carriage, the velvet interior warm with candlelight, though her hands remained clasped tightly in her lap, as if afraid the slightest movement might undo her fragile composure. Outside, the world blurred into muted grays and frosted hedgerows. The wheels hummed against the frozen ground, carrying her farther from everything she had known and deeper into a role she had never imagined playing. She forced herself to breathe steadily, though her heart thrummed with the tremor of an uncertain future. She had agreed to become the false mother to a young woman who had lost the real one. She had agreed to live under a nobleman's roof without the protection of marriage. She had agreed, quite simply, to step into danger disguised as duty. Yet beneath her fear flickered a subtle ember, an unfamiliar warmth born of the Duke's rare trust. It unsettled her more than the cold. When the carriage finally approached the estate, dawn had surrendered to the pale shimmer of morning. Wintreshire Manor emerged from the mist like something carved from the northern wind. Towering turrets, long wings of grey stone, windows tall as confessionals. Snow crowned the roof like silver lace. The estate looked both magnificent and sorrowful, as if holding its breath for someone to bring it back to life. Christina felt the weight of it immediately. This was no simple country house. This was a vault of memories. The Duke stepped out first, extending his gloved hand. She placed hers into it, noting the faint warmth of his touch even through layers of winter fabric. "Welcome," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I pray you find some comfort here." Comfort. She doubted anyone living in these echoing halls had known such a thing in years. Inside, the entrance hall spread before her in a cascade of marble and candlelight. Portraits lined the walls, stern ancestors, forgotten cousins, and lastly, the late Duchess herself, captured in youthful serenity. Christina paused, her gaze lingering on the painted woman with chestnut curls and a faint, knowing smile. "That portrait was her favorite," the Duke murmured from behind. "She chose it the year Genevieve was born." Christina sensed the reverence in his tone, the unspoken grief. She lowered her eyes respectfully. "She was beautiful. Genevieve has her eyes." He paused, as though bracing himself. "You will see that soon enough." Servants appeared to take Christina's cloak, their polite expressions betraying mild surprise at her presence. No doubt they had speculated endlessly about their master's isolation, about the girl's distance, about the sudden reappearance of a lady none had expected. Christina felt the prickle of their curiosity but kept her poise. She was determined to fulfill the task entrusted to her. Her chamber was situated near the east wing, furnished in soft blues and ivory, overlooking a garden now buried under winter's hush. She barely had time to sit before a gentle knock sounded at the door. "Lady Harbury," the Duke said, stepping inside with formal restraint. "It is time you met Genevieve, if you feel prepared." Prepared. Christina doubted she ever could be. But she rose. They walked through a quiet corridor where sunlight, thin but pure, streamed across the floors. The Duke's steps slowed as they approached a tall set of double doors. "She prefers the morning room," he said quietly. It was her mother's favorite. Christina's heart softened. The room they entered was bathed in golden light, its windows stretching from floor to ceiling. A young woman stood beside a pianoforte, her hands resting lightly upon its polished surface. Genevieve turned, and Christina was caught off guard by the girl's beauty. Slender, poised, her hair the pale shade of honey, her eyes a soft blue filled with yearning and wariness. "My daughter," the Duke said gently. "This is Lady Harbury." Genevieve curtsied with dignity. "My lord tells me you will be assisting us during the season." Her voice was quiet but clear, carrying the faint tremor of someone accustomed to disappointment. Christina stepped closer. "Only if you permit me, Miss Wintreshire." The girl's gaze flickered, assessing. "Father speaks highly of you." A subtle tension rippled through the air. Christina sensed Genevieve's need for guidance, yet also her reluctance to trust any woman who stepped into this house. She had lost too much to surrender her heart lightly. Christina reached into her pocket and removed a small brooch, a silver snowdrop, delicate yet resilient. "This belonged to my mother," she said softly. "I believe a young lady should have a token that speaks of hope. Snowdrops bloom even in winter." Genevieve hesitated. Her chin trembled, barely a shift, but enough to betray the emotion she fought to hide. Slowly, she accepted the brooch. "Thank you," she whispered, fastening it near her collar. The Duke exhaled in relief, as though Christina had performed a miracle. For a moment, Christina felt the beginnings of something like belonging. But peace was short-lived. That afternoon, a footman delivered a sealed envelope addressed to the Duke but marked in curling script, "Concerning the lady in your household." His expression darkened as he read. Without a word, he passed it to Christina. "London whispers that Lady Harbury has abandoned propriety to secure your favor. They say a woman of her age would settle for comfort where she cannot attain a crown. I caution you, Wintreshire, tongues sharpen quickly in winter." Christina's stomach knotted. She imagined the ton, smirks, raised brows, cruel laughter. She sank onto a chair, mortified. "Forgive me, my lord," she murmured. "I did not anticipate." "This is not your fault," he said, sharper than she'd ever heard him. He tore the letter cleanly in half. "The fault lies with those who find satisfaction in tearing down a woman whose dignity exceeds their own." His anger startled her, not its presence, but its direction. He was not angry with her. He was angry for her. "You are under my protection while you are here," he said firmly. "No whisper shall touch you without answer." The words settled between them with the weight of a vow. Later, after supper, she found refuge in the library, its tall shelves rising like forests around her. A fire glowed on the hearth. She reached for a volume of poetry, seeking distraction, when the Duke entered quietly. "I did not mean to intrude," he said, though his voice warmed the room more than the flames. "You are no intrusion, my lord." He approached, steps slow, deliberate. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the sternness she had grown accustomed to. He took a book from a high shelf and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. The contact was fleeting, yet it sparked through her like lightning beneath the skin. She inhaled sharply. He, too, froze. "Forgive me," he murmured, though he made no move to step back. "I did not expect—" He stopped, searching her gaze. "You unsettle me, Lady Harbury." A soft ache blossomed inside her chest. "And you unsettle me, my lord." Their breath mingled, suspended in the fire-lit hush. Christina felt the fragile pull of something she dared not name. The walls of Wintreshire seemed to draw closer, trapping the fragile moment like a secret held between them. But before either could speak further, footsteps echoed in the corridor, light yet hurried. A maid appeared at the threshold, cheeks flushed. "My lord," she said breathlessly, "a messenger has arrived from London. The Crown requests your presence, and your complete family, to open the Christmas ball before the monarchy." The Duke stiffened. Christina's pulse faltered. The charade had just become far more perilous than either of them anticipated. Snow fell with renewed insistence the morning after the Crown's summons, transforming Wintreshire into a world wrapped in pearl-white silence. Christina stood at her chamber window, watching the flakes drift down like fragments of forgotten dreams. The summons had changed everything. It was no longer a gentle charade confined to the estate. It had become a public performance before the monarchy itself. She felt the weight of expectation pressing upon her shoulders like a too heavy cloak. A soft knock drew her from her thoughts. Genevieve entered, clutching the snowdrop brooch as though it anchored her. Her pale hair was braided simply, her cheeks tinged with the faint blush of someone who had not slept well. "Lady Harbury," she began, voice small, "is it true? Will we be presented to the Crown together?" Christina nodded. "It seems the expectation." Genevieve's throat fluttered as she swallowed. "I do not know if I can bear it. They will stare. They will whisper about mother. They always whisper." Christina crossed the room, taking the girl's chilled hands into her own. "Let them whisper. You shall not stand alone. I will be at your side, and your father will be there as well." Genevieve's gaze softened, a fragile trust forming like frost tracing a windowpane. "I wish I had met you years ago," she whispered. "Perhaps everything would have been different." Christina's heart tightened. "We cannot change the past, but we may shape the days ahead." Genevieve drew a trembling breath. "Then please, help me be brave." "I shall," Christina promised. The storm intensified by afternoon, confining them indoors. Servants hurried through the hallways carrying firewood, shawls, and steaming kettles. It was during these hours of forced intimacy that Christina began to see the contours of the Duke's household more clearly. The quiet loyalty of his staff, the melancholy lodged deep in the walls, the way Genevieve's eyes followed her father with both longing and restraint. Yet the Duke himself remained elusive, retreating to his study as though wrestling a private tempest. Christina felt his absence like a bruise. She wondered if he regretted involving her, wondered if he feared what society would make of their arrangement, wondered, dangerously, if the brief spark between them had unsettled him as much as it had her. As the afternoon waned, Christina made her way toward the library, drawn by the promise of warmth and solitude. But when she opened the door, she found the Duke seated beside the hearth, his brow furrowed, a letter crushed loosely in his hand. He looked up sharply, as though caught in the middle of unguarded emotion. "My lord," she murmured, stepping inside. "I may return if you—" "Do not leave," he said quickly, surprising them both. would prefer the company. She seated herself across from him, the fire casting amber across his features. You seem troubled. His eyes drifted toward the flames. The summons, he said softly. The monarchy will expect a display of unity, a family unmarred by grief or scandal. Genevieve is brittle as winter glass. And you? He hesitated, as though choosing his words with care. You have already endured too much scrutiny on my account. Christina met his gaze, steady despite the tremor in her chest. I made my choice. I do not regret it. No, he said quietly. But I do. Her breath caught. Why? Because you deserve admiration, not pity. Esteem, not suspicion. And yet by drawing you into this household, I have placed you directly in the line of society's cruelty. His voice roughened, unexpected and deeply human. I fear I have been selfish. Christina felt the slow bloom of warmth, something tender, something dangerous. If I may speak plainly, my lord, I do not feel harmed. I feel useful. I feel seen. He leaned back, exhaling as though her words lifted a weight from him. Then I am grateful for your courage. The fire crackled, filling the quiet. Outside, wind pressed against the windows like a restless spirit. Christina could feel the nearness of him, not physical, but emotional, an invisible tether pulling them into the same fragile moment. You do not trust easily, she said softly. The Duke's gaze drifted to the shadows. After my wife's passing, I lost the ability. Trust became a luxury I could not afford. Those who approached me did so for title, for power, for the novelty of a grieving man. I have been alone in rooms filled with people. Christina swallowed. And now? His eyes returned to her, dark, searching, alive. Now, I find myself confiding in someone whose approval I value more than I should. Her breath trembled. You value my approval? Yes, he said simply. Something in her chest shifted, fragile as a moth's wing. She had never felt so vulnerable, so seen. It frightened her, and yet she could not look away. Your daughter needs you, she said softly. Not as a duke, but as a father. She misses you, though she does not know how to say it. The Duke closed his eyes briefly, pain passing over his features like a shadow. I fear I have failed her beyond repair. No bond is beyond repair, Christina murmured. Not when the heart still yearns. He opened his eyes again, and she felt the quiet gravity of his remorse, his hope, his unspoken longing. The moment wrapped around them like the warmth of the fire, delicate, perilous, intimate. A sudden knock shattered the silence. Genevieve entered, cheeks flushed from haste. Father, Lady Harbury, please come. There is something you must see. They followed her through the corridor to the grand hall where a cluster of servants huddled near the windows, murmuring anxiously. Christina stepped forward and saw the cause of their alarm, a lone rider approaching through the storm, bearing the colors of the crown. Snow whipped around him, icy shards catching on the royal seal strapped across his chest. The Duke stiffened beside her. Christina's pulse quickened. A royal messenger in such weather meant urgency, perhaps danger. The rider dismounted, stumbling toward the entrance. Moments later, the butler admitted the messenger, drenched and trembling. He bowed deeply. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but I bring a message of utmost importance. The Duke took the sealed parchment, his jaw tightening as he read. Christina saw the blood drain from his face. My lord, she whispered, dread tightening her spine. What does it say? He looked up slowly, eyes shadowed with something far heavier than before. The monarchy, he said, voice barely above a breath, has altered the expectations for the Christmas ball. How altered? Christina asked. His next words fell like stones. They now require a formal demonstration of familial unity, including a public declaration. He swallowed. A declaration that will place you and Genevieve at the epicenter of every gaze. Christina's heartbeat thundered. What sort of declaration? She whispered. The Duke stepped closer. tension rippling through him. One that demands we act as a family not merely in appearance, he said, his voice darkening, but in bond. And in his expression, raw, unguarded, she understood. Whatever lay ahead would test not only their courage, but their hearts. The days leading to the Christmas ball unfurled like pages in a story neither Christina nor the Duke felt quite prepared to read. Preparations consumed the estate. Seamstresses arrived with bolts of silk and shimmering brocade, footmen polished silver until it gleamed like starlight, and Genevieve practiced curtsies before the pier-glass with trembling determination. Beneath the flurry, tension hummed, a delicate thread binding them in a shared performance that grew heavier by the hour. The Crown's decree weighed most sharply upon Christina. A public declaration, one that insisted not merely upon polished facade but a convincing display of familial unity, was more dangerous than any whispered gossip. It would bind her to the Duke and Genevieve in a way she had not foreseen. Society would watch her, the Ton would judge her, and the monarchy would expect a sincerity she feared she could not mimic without revealing too much. On the evening before their departure for London, snow fell again, thick, soft, relentless. Christina wandered into the conservatory, drawn by the scent of winter roses blooming despite the frost. The glass walls glowed with moonlight, and for a moment she allowed herself the luxury of stillness. She traced the edge of a petal, its velvet surface cold beneath her fingertips. She did not hear the Duke until he was beside her. Christina. Her name on his lips sounded like an invocation, not a greeting. She turned. He stood in the pale glow, his coat unbuttoned, the collar loosened as though he had come here in haste. "You have been distant today." "I feared overwhelming Genevieve," she said, though that was only half true. His eyes softened. "And what do you fear overwhelming in yourself?" She looked away, the roses blurring. "I fear this play will feel too real." The silence that followed was painfully intimate. Snow tapped lightly against the glass, each flake a quiet witness to their unraveling restraint. "Then it is not merely a performance for you," he said, stepping closer. Her breath tightened. "Is it for you?" He exhaled, slow and unsteady. "It began as necessity. But necessity has given way to something else, something I did not anticipate. When you speak to Genevieve, she listens. When you enter a room, its darkness recedes. When you look at me—" He paused, searching her with eyes that held both hunger and fear. "I remember what hope feels like." Christina felt her composure sink beneath the weight of his honesty. "And yet after Twelfth Night, I am meant to vanish from this house as though none of this ever existed." His jaw tightened as though the thought wounded him. "I do not wish for you to vanish." "Then what do you wish?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He reached for her hand, slowly, reverently, as if afraid she might break beneath his touch. His fingers brushed hers, and the faint tremor in his grip betrayed more than words ever could. "I wish," he murmured, "that I could keep you here, without the world believing I have taken advantage of your generosity or your reputation." For a moment their hands hovered, touching only by breath, not by skin. And still Christina felt the warmth of him, the pull of him, the danger of him. But before she could answer, Genevieve appeared in the doorway, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Lady Harbury, father, the carriage is prepared for morning. And I wish to ask, may I sit with you when we arrive in London? The crowds will terrify me." Christina smiled gently. "Of course." Genevieve stepped inside, hesitating only briefly before offering the rose she held. "This one reminds me of you." The Duke watched the exchange with a tenderness that tightened Christina's throat. "We should retire soon," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be long." They parted with unspoken words between them, lingering like warm breath in winter air. The journey to London the next day was a tapestry of nerves and anticipation. Christina sat beside Genevieve, holding the girl's hand when the clamor of the city grew too loud. The Duke sat across from them, watching with an expression that shifted between pride and something deeper, something he attempted, and failed, to mask. By evening the palace ballroom glittered with candlelight and royal splendor. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from gilded ceilings, casting reflections in polished marble floors. Guests arrived in shimmering waves, dukes, viscounts, ambassadors, ladies draped in jewels that caught the light like frozen rain. Whispers ignited the moment Wintreshire entered. There, look, Lady Harbury, in the Duke's household. Did he choose her to replace the late Duchess? She is too poised, too graceful by half. Perhaps he means to announce. Christina felt every murmur like a pinprick against her skin. The Duke noticed. Without hesitation, he moved closer, placing her hand upon his arm with deliberate gentleness, a gesture both protective and unmistakably intimate. Genevieve, standing on Christina's other side, lifted her chin with surprising courage. "Let them talk," she whispered. "We are together." The royal trumpets silenced the room. The monarchy entered, resplendent in winter white and silver. The Queen's gaze swept the assembly, pausing briefly upon the trio from Wintreshire. Christina's heart hammered. The crown expected unity. It expected truth woven through performance. Then the music began, the first waltz, the one reserved for those summoned to open the ball. The Duke turned to Christina. Protocol dictated that a widower in formal mourning should refrain from dancing. Breaking that rule would ignite immediate scandal. But he did not hesitate. "Christina," he murmured, voice low enough to belong only to her, "may I have this dance?" Time slowed. "My lord," she whispered, "people will talk. Let them." He extended his hand, and she placed hers into it. They stepped into the center of the ballroom, the crowd parting as though a tide drawn back by moonlight. Gasps fluttered through the air, shocked, delighted, scandalized. The Duke's hand encircled her waist, firm yet reverent. Christina's fingers rested upon his shoulder, her heartbeat aligning with the music, with him. The waltz began, and they moved as though bound by invisible thread. Candlelight shimmered across their faces. The room faded to nothing but the quiet thunder of emotion between them. She could feel the question in his touch, the vow in his gaze, the impossible wish forming in the breath they shared. "This," he murmured as they turned, "is no pretense." Her pulse faltered. "Then what is it?" "A truth," he said, "that I am no longer willing to hide." The music swelled. The room watched. When the final note faded, silence rippled through the ballroom. And then the Duke did the unthinkable. He dropped to one knee. Christina's breath vanished. Gasps erupted, a storm of whispers rising around them. The monarchy itself leaned forward, captivated. "Christena Harbury," he said, voice steady though his eyes shone with unguarded devotion. "This charade ended the moment you entered my home. I ask you now, before the crown, before society, before my daughter, not to pretend another day. Will you remain at Wintreshire, as its mistress, and as my wife?" The ballroom went still as falling snow. Christina stared at him, her heart rioting against her ribs. Genevieve watched with trembling hope. The Queen's gaze was sharp, patient. Every whisper, every gaze, every breath waited for her answer. And in that suspended moment, poised between duty and desire, Christina felt her world tilt.